welcome to my free Java video course, Lesson 7. My name is Markus Biel. My goal is to teach you Java in the easiest possible way. For feedback, send an email to info@markus-biel.com or tweet to @markusbiel. In this video, I would like to talk about conditional statements, like if-else statements and Boolean logic. However, as always, let's first of all recap what I showed you in the last lesson. So in the last lesson I talked about the tools which I'm using when doing this Java course for you. So first of all, there is IntelliJ IDEA, this IDE that I'm using. This at the moment is my favorite IDE, but of course there are many other alternatives that you might and should try out. The three most prominent ones besides IntelliJ IDEA are probably Eclipse and NetBeans. I've just looked it up actually. Each of them is about 15 years old, so it doesn't really matter which one you choose. I think all the three ones are really mature products. Just try them and make up your own mind. Okay, so besides the IDE, I also showed you the testing framework that I'm using to write all these tests. And this is JUnit. Besides JUnit, probably, the second most prominent one, or also really good alternative, is TestNG. For me, they're both pretty much the same, so it doesn't really matter which one you use, and it would be probably dependent on which project or in which company you're working. So sooner or later you will probably know both of them anyway. Okay, and then of course I really shortly introduced the build management tool that I'm using, which is Maven. Here you can see the POM XML file. Here I defined the dependencies. So you can see at the moment I'm only using JUnit in version 4.12. And I've set the source encoding to UTF-8. Maven, also like JUnit, each of them is really a huge topic, and I could have a dedicated course on each of them, but I don't have yet. Might have at a later time. Till then, just have a look on the internet. There are really great resources that would explain these tools in detail. We're going to really focus on Java in this course. Okay, what else? So the last tool I was talking about was a text editor. I'm a lazy guy here, so I'm using an IDE because it really assists me when typing the code. But when you really are a beginner in programming, and Java specifically, and there are all these new keywords like public and class and void, what I found out for me personally is you need to use them. You need to type them, you need to see them, and the more you touch these keywords, the better you will grasp them. And when your IDE is too smart, that might not be so helpful at the beginning. So I showed you two text editors, Sublime, and then also TextPad for Windows. So you might want to start with one of them at the beginning. Later on you can always switch over to an IDE just for the beginning until you feel comfortable with all the keywords that we already presented and talked about in the video. So, okay, I think this pretty much rounds it up. So now let's start with the topic of this video, which is conditional statements, like I said before. And of course, conditional statements and Booleans. So a Boolean is a new data type. This one is actually a primitive, and it can have two values, Boolean true or false. And this is all there is to it. So conditional statements, there is a condition and it can hold true or not, and then something is executed or not. I think already from the wording it makes sense and you might easily understand it. But what exactly is a Boolean? Why is it called Boolean? I mean, this is a bit weird, I think. Well, at least this is what I found, so I just looked it up on the internet. Here on Wikipedia, we have Boolean algebra. And, I'm really not a big fan of mathematics, so let's go over this really fast. The only thing that matters to me is Boolean algebra was introduced by George Boole in his first book, blah 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 whatsoever. So it turns out that the Boolean is called Boolean because of this guy here. I'll leave this as your homework. Read everything about George Boole and Boolean algebra, of course. This is again a big topic by itself. We're focusing again on Java. I just wanted to help you that you get a feeling why Boolean is called a Boolean. So this thingy here is really helpful when we want to say if something happens or something exists, some condition, then only execute a specific area of code. And then you can also say else, if this condition does not hold true, execute something else. So this is really, the if statement is probably the most important statement, not only in Java, probably in all programming languages, at least the ones I know of, because it allows us to really have a different execution flow each time. For example, we could say, I mean, B is a bit boring. Let's call this Monday. And let's add Boolean raining. Now it's raining. Let's also have Monday. Okay, so in this little example, it's Monday and it's raining. And now we could say, if it's Monday, ampersand twice, raining. So what these two ampersand mean is and. So this tells Java to check on this Boolean value, check if it's true, and only if the first Boolean value, or here could also be a function, like is it Monday, which would have to return a Boolean, and if it does, only then Java would execute go here and check if this is also true, which also could of course be a function. If is it raining or whatever, right? And if both here are true, then this block here, starting with the curly braces, is going to be executed. Now, I mean, I don't want to implement the functions, so let's make this Monday again and simply raining, just to keep it simple. And then drink beer, because with rain, I mean, what else can you do? But now let's make this more easy to drink beer. I'm from Munich, so I'm really a beer lover. So on Mac, I mean, this depends which platform you use. On Mac, you press just Alt and 7 twice. This is called the pipe symbol. And the pipe symbol symbolizes or. Yeah, I know this is a bit weird. This you just have to know by heart that this means or. Again, as before with the two ampersands, when you repeat it twice, it's called the short circuit operator, which means if the first condition is already not true, for the and, at least, then it's not going to execute the rest. So whenever in a statement it sees that a condition cannot hold true anymore, it will stop at the beginning and it will not execute the rest, which is very handy because, I mean, if before we had a method here, is it raining? Now imagine this method takes like 2 hours to execute. We could really save that time if we already see this is only true if both are true. So this is why you use the ampersand twice and the pipe symbol twice. This is, I would say, the default. So I won't even spend time to talk about the other alternative. But now this is so much nicer. If I have an or here, if it's Monday or if it's raining, I drink a beer. So this really increases my chance to get a beer. So I personally like this statement so much more. I'm just kidding. So this is the difference, or and. And of course you can further combine that. Let's, I don't know what to do. Let's say raining and, yeah, let's say Tuesday and sunny. So we have to introduce these Boolean variables first. So Tuesday, well, if it's Monday, it can't be Tuesday, so we will say false here. And Boolean, if it's raining, it can't be sunny. So sunny will be false. But of course, let's change this. Now it's not Monday, it's Tuesday. So this would be true. And I misspelled that, sunny. Okay, now they're not red anymore. So now, what do we have here? Monday is false. So if Monday, it's raining, but it's not Monday at the moment. So this is, the whole thing here is not true. But here we have an or. Tuesday, this is true. Sunny is still false, so this is also false. Which means the whole if statement is false and we cannot drink a beer. But let's make this true. And now it's Tuesday, and it's sunny, and we can drink a beer. Hooray! Of course, I mean, when it gets more complicated, I'd recommend you to introduce more brackets to really tell Java, first execute this, and the result, when you have it, then only execute the next statement. I mean, if you go in more detail on the algebraic logic, you will see there are preferences and there are really rules on that, but if you don't know them and if you always just add the brackets, you're on the safe side to show what you want. Okay, now let's make this not so complicated, because let's introduce something else, and this else is the else statement. Because if it's not Monday, we can do something else. And this is the new keyword that I'm introducing, the else statement. So here we can say drink milk. Might also be nice. Okay, so only on Monday we drink a beer, and on all other days we drink a milk. So that means we have to drink a lot of milk. So if you, I mean, milk is really healthy, so I recommend you drink milk like this, it's much better. But of course, let's introduce some more variation. Else if, let's introduce a new day. Let's say Friday. So we have to introduce Friday. At the moment it's Tuesday, so we'll change that in a minute. Make this false. So else if Friday, drink water. Okay, so what do we have now? And I mean, you can format this in any way, but usually you format it like this so that you can see this whole construct belongs together, because it starts with if Monday, and if this is not true, Java has to check, else, is it Friday? If so, then call this function. And in all other cases, we still drink milk. So, okay. And you can have any number of else-if statements here. Else if, I don't know, some other condition, we could just say sunny. If it's sunny, what should we do? Go swimming. Go swimming. Yeah, you can do anything here. Okay, so you can have any number of else-if statements, and you can have just one else statement, of course. But you don't have to. I mean, this is not obligatory. You can also leave it away. You cannot have else-if by itself, because else what? I mean, there has to be, the whole statement has to start with some if. Okay. I think this pretty much is enough for if, else, if, and else. Now let's do some more cool stuff. Let me remove all that. Because normally you evaluate some condition, and then when the condition is evaluated, this returns a Boolean under the covers, I would say. For example, you could say int e equals to 4. And then we could say int j equals to 3. Omit that. Okay, so we have two primitive data types of int, which are introduced in a former video. And then I can compare both values. I can say, I mean, here of course, as well as with the Booleans, it's obvious. But I mean, in a big program, it's not so easy. Normally, one function calls the other, and you would like have a user typing in data, and then you don't know if the user typed in 4 or 3. So I mean, this is a really stupid example. I mean, we know that 4 is bigger than 3, but let's assume that we don't know. And then I could say if I greater than j, then do something. Else, do something else. I mean, here it's again, you can say else if. You could say if j greater than I. What else can we say? Else if I equal to j, which at the moment, of course, does not hold true. This, by the way, you see there are two equal signs. The reason is this equal sign we use here when we assign the value of 4 to I or j. So we can't use that again. Instead, in Java, you use two equal symbols to express I want to have a Boolean check. And what you also can do, so you see the result of this will be a Boolean value. You can assign that Boolean value are equal to a Boolean variable. And this is actually quite often very smart. I mean, here it's very easy to understand, but sometimes you have way more complex terms. And then if you give it a name, your code will be much more easy to read, because now you can say are equal. Okay. And then there is also greater or equal, smaller or equal, and then also unequal, which I would usually type in like this, but it's actually the same. So not equal, you can say with the exclamation mark equal, or with greater, smaller, like this. It's both the same thing. I really prefer that one. I think it's more readable because this is like exclamation mark, really it's easy to read. And with this, you can also, whatever condition you have, if this now holds true, and you put the exclamation mark in front of it, then it's false. If this before was false, now it's true. I think you can even, yes, you can add any number of exclamation marks, and every time the value is inverted. So from true, false, then true again, then false again, and so on. I mean, this is not really readable, so I wouldn't do it. Just to be complete, I wanted to mention this is possible. Okay, I think this pretty much rounds it up. We talked about Boolean. This is a condition. If it's true, we execute code that is in here. You see it can also be empty. I mean, this doesn't really make sense. I mean, I would really recommend you to write something, execute some method. You can also, of course, you don't have to have a method in here. Well, again, I would recommend it because it might be much more readable. But in here, you can also do crazy stuff like I equals to 8, for example. J equals to 99. So you see, now we have actually some code, or plus plus, the increment operator that I talked about. I think it was in lesson 5. So if J with 3 before, when this is executed, it will be 4. Or minus minus, it was 3 before, it will be 2. Okay, so you can have directly booleans in here. What you cannot do is compare a boolean to another data type like int. I mean, this wouldn't really make sense. What you can do, and this really a lot of beginners do, like to compare a boolean value. Let's make this Monday again. Monday, true. And now you could say if Monday equals to true. What does this mean? I mean, this means if true equals to true. Of course, this works. And if this was false, if false equals to true, false does not equal to true, so the whole thing is false. But I mean, this is one comparison too much. Just say if Monday, this is enough. Yeah, but really, comparisons like this, false or true, I really see very often in code. So if you see that, you're free to refactor the code and just shorten it. If it's true, then just say if Monday. If Monday false, you just say if not Monday. So see, this is not. Okay. Yeah, so that's it. If you have any questions, like always, send me an email or a tweet on Twitter. I'm really happy to receive your feedback, and see you next time.